Okay, I wanted to do a more in-depth and discussion video in regards of the Star Trek Section 31 movie, which was currently available to watch and stream on Paramount Plus. And for those of you who see my YouTube short, you would have seen my short review and what I thought of it. And for me, coming from being a big Star Trek fan, it was absolutely terrible. And other written sites and even on YouTube have said that they didn't like it. Now, where I kind of have I divert from the reviews that I've seen, especially on YouTube, there have been some YouTubers that have said the movie was bad, but it's actually for the wrong reasons, which is going to sound a bit weird considering I just said the movie was actually terrible. But we'll go on further in the video as to explaining myself. But I wanted to explain that I've always been a big sci-fi fan all my life. So anything science fiction, whether it's TV shows, movies, cartoons, wherever the media may be, I've always loved. Star Wars, people know, people may not know, I've absolutely love, especially, well, more so the original trilogy. But with Star Trek, I've loved Star Trek all my life, and it was that sense of exploration, and then exploring different worlds and technology, and see how far civilization has evolved. And obviously we see how society is across the world and how things, wars and politics affect people and crime. And it's imagining being in this world where all of that is gone and everybody's treated equally, and a bigger and better future. And for me, it was obviously start off with the original series. Then they had their 6 movies, and then we had the Next Generation, which ran for 7 seasons, and then they had their movies as well. And obviously they did come back with some of them in the first season of Picard. And then we had Deep Space Nine, which ran for 7 seasons. And then we had Star Trek Voyager, which ran for, again, 7 seasons. And then we had Star Trek Enterprise. Of all, in the initial first 2 seasons were just called Enterprise, but then they changed it and called it Star Trek Enterprise to try and get, capitalize on the Star Trek franchise name. Because initially it was just called Enterprise, and they just wanted to kind of stray away from the traditional Star Trek shows. And unfortunately, that only ran for 4 seasons. For me, it's a shame that it didn't run longer than what it should have done, considering that it really did improve with the 4th season, and the actual plans that they were going to do with the remaining. If it had gotten the 7 seasons, the full 7 seasons, it would have been fantastic. And unfortunately, we never got that. Although we got the last episode, the infamous holodeck episode, which technically wasn't meant to be the last episode, but had to be shoehorned in because obviously the studio decided not to renew the series, for another season. And then it would go on hiatus, and then we would get shows like Star Trek Discovery, and we would have Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Obviously, Star Trek Discovery now has finished its 5-season run. And then we've got Strange New Worlds, which this year hopefully we should be getting season 3. I'm assuming it's going to be run. I think it is at least renewed for 4 seasons, and I'm assuming that it will at least get 5 before obviously they do anything. Then we had Star Trek Lower Decks, which obviously was a cartoon, and at first I was a bit unsure, especially it was a little bit more comedic, and how that show would run, and it's actually really good. So if you haven't watched it, I would highly recommend watching it if you already haven't. And then we would have Star Trek Prodigy again, which was it ran for 2 seasons, and I doubt that's going to come back now. And that was mainly for younger viewers, and that was great as well. And that was on Nickelodeon, and then over here in the UK it was on Star Trek Paramount Plus, and then it was on Amazon. It just bounced around. Again, that's a really good show. And then you saw the returning characters of Janeway and the Doctor and Chakotay. So that I really recommend watching. So I've been a huge fan. So pretty much every Star Trek movie, and then obviously we had the Kelvin timeline with Star Trek that came out, then the sequel Star Trek Into Darkness, then we ended up getting the last one, Star Trek Beyond. And obviously there are rumors about they're trying to write a fourth movie, which I'm hoping that they do, because I think the cast in that movie was absolutely fantastic. So I've been a huge and even shows which aren't to do with Star Trek but have been influenced by it. For example, like The Orville, which you can blatantly see that it's heavily influenced from Star Trek. And Seth MacFarlane actually did appear in an episode of Star Trek Enterprise as a bridge crew member. So, and then he was a huge Star Trek fan himself. So Star Trek over the years has had a lot of influences and a lot of effects on people. And over you hear about Trekkies and people cosplaying as Star Trek characters. And so for me, that's my history of it. Most of the Star Trek franchise in the media, I pretty much own pretty much everything. So for example, the first 6 movies which featured the original crew, I've owned all of those on DVD, and even when they were eventually available to purchase on Blu-ray, I actually even upgraded to buy them on as a steelbook, which I don't think I've got one handy. But there was a I'm trying to think if I can actually show you the next generation version of it. So that maybe, oh, dropped something there. I'll show you the next generation version if I can get this out. But what they did a few years ago is that they released a and I slowly started to collect them. I can get this out. So I'll show you here that this is Insurrection, where they released I think it's I'm trying to check here to see if it's the 50th, because I don't. Yeah, they released all of the original 6 Star Trek movies, from the motion picture to the final one, Undiscovered Country, as a Blu-ray steelbook as a 50th anniversary, and I collected all of those. And then they released the next generation movies, which was Generations, First Contact, Insurrection, and Nemesis, which I know people don't like, and that was part of the 50th anniversary, so I collected all of those. And again, previously before that, I had every single the original crew 6 movies on DVD, and I even rebought them again when they released them as special editions. So shows you how much of a fan I am. The original series, I own them on Blu-ray. The Next Generation, I own seasons 1 to 7, so I've got the complete box set of that on DVD, and I'm halfway into replacing My Next Generation on Blu-ray, because a few years ago they re-released The Next Generation seasons 1 to 7 on Blu-ray. And the reason why I rebought those, because what they basically did was that they digitally remastered it, so they redid the effects and even recolored it, so actually from the original source material. So when you watch the DVD version of The Next Generation seasons, and then the Blu-ray version, it looks completely different. Deep Space Nine, and then they released them in this plastic container, which I think I may have shown on my channel, but if not, I will do a separate video of that sometime in the future. I mean, Deep Space Nine, obviously that ran for 7 seasons. I had to complete seasons of Deep Space Nine, which came in a plastic container, and at the time each season were about between 50 to 80 quid at the time from HMV, and I slowly got those over the years when DVD obviously was first coming out, and I completed that. A similar thing with Voyager, where I think Voyager again ran for 7 seasons. I think the first 5 seasons, some of the seasons, I think 5 of the seasons have come in a plastic container, and 2 of them I bought in the slim packaging, because it was just cheaper than getting the plastic container thing, which again you've seen on my channel. Enterprise, that came at all 4 seasons. They were pretty easy to get. They were available in this plastic box set, which I got, and that was easy to get because I released full seasons. So I've got all of Enterprise. I've even rebought Enterprise on Blu-ray. I think I've got seasons 1, 3, and 4. I just need to get season 2. And as for I pretty much got everything. Discovery, I've got season 1, but I don't have seasons 2, 3, and 4, and 5 yet. I'm just waiting for. It's mainly to do with I'm waiting for a price drop before I complete that. And Strange New Worlds, again, the first 2 seasons. Again, I'm just waiting for a price drop, and then I will buy those. Similar thing with Prodigy, and a similar thing with Lower Decks, where again, I'm gonna wait for a price drop at some point, and I will collect those particular seasons. But even Evolver, I may not necessarily have them all of it physically. I have watched every single movie, and then obviously the Kelvin movies, where I've got Star Trek, the original, the reboot, or the Kelvin one. I've got that as a normal Blu-ray and as a steelbook. Well, I got it as 2 steelbooks, so I've got it 3 times. Shows how much of a fan I am. Into Darkness, I've got it as a special normal Blu-ray, but it's a Sainsbury's exclusive, so you get an extra disc. And at the time when it was available, when it was going to be available to pre-order, I also pre-ordered the Blu-ray steelbook of Into Darkness, so I've got that twice. And then Star Trek Beyond, I've only got that as a normal Blu-ray. So I'm a huge Star Trek fan, and religiously every year, whether it's the Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise, the current movies, I watch them pretty much quite regularly every year. I just rewatched a couple of days ago Star Trek: The Motion Picture, the director's cut, and even over the years that I kind of I didn't like it. People may know that it was also known as the slow motion picture, and with the director's cut, they made some changes to it. But over the years, and as I've got older, I've absolutely I've actually like Star Trek: The Motion Picture. Maybe it's my old age showing. So I am a huge Star Trek fan, as I've gone for the last 12 minutes back. So I just wanted to get it out of the way. I'm not going to turn and say I'm a Star Trek expert, but I am a huge Star Trek fan, as I've recently discussed on the episodes and the shows. If I don't have all, especially the newer Star Treks, that if I don't have all of them physically, I have watched all of them and have access to be able to watch them anytime I want, especially on these streaming services. Now, whether this goes back to Section 31 and why I said that some of the YouTubers have said it's bad. A lot of the ones that have said it's bad, it's not necessarily, it's not because so much because of the fact that the Section 31 movie is bad. It's more to do with a lot of the people, some of those YouTubers, some of them, not all, and I'm not going to name them, are doing it because a lot of them have got right-wing views, and especially with the newer Star Trek movies and even the shows now, they try to propagate them all being woke. And from what little snippets I've seen with some of their reviews of Section 31, they're trying to use this woke agenda and this left agenda and go, oh, that's why the movie was Section 31 was bad. So they're not even reviewing it objectively, which is what I'm gonna be doing without spoiling anything. You'll see where I'm coming from. Now, I don't like the term woke or trying to use politics and everything, but what I find really dumb about some of these people is Star Trek has always been woke if you go by the definition of what woke is, and hear me out on what I say about this. Now, a lot of people do the research and watch interviews of Gene Roddenberry, obviously the creator of Star Trek, and seeing his vision of Star Trek. Obviously, he envisioned his version of Star Trek where it was basically this paradise where there was no need for money, there was no violence, there was no politics or religion. Everybody was treated equally, regardless of their gender, of their race. And then obviously with the Federation and Starfleet, obviously you had different aliens that were obviously part of the Federation and Starfleet, and obviously the Federation of Planets, which you've heard of. So it was meant to be this utopia of everybody was treated equally. regardless of your color of your skin, and whether you're male or female, or your sexuality, or whether you're alien. And that was Gene Roddenberry's vision of what he wanted, his perfect paradise. And especially in a lot of the new Star Treks now, we kind of, more so now, we kind of see that. And a lot of these right-wing YouTubers don't like that because they say, oh, it's woke and it's trying to pander to certain, this perfect imagery. But that, if you go back and watch Star Trek, it's always been like that, which I find really dumb. I remember, and I don't know the name, but can't remember the name of the episode so far, but I remember there was an episode of the original series where there was these aliens who half their face was painted black and the other side painted white, and they were at war with their own set of people on the planet, because where, for example, one set of the racist people, maybe their right side of their face was black and the left side was white, but the other section of people's face was black on the left and white on the right, and simply because their colors of the half of their face obviously was black and white, was on the opposite side, they hated each other, even though they were the same race. It's just that where they were black, it was the opposite, and white was opposite. So you saw the conflicts of that, and how futile and how silly that was, being that they were the same race of people. Just the color of their skin being black and white was some people's, it was on the different side of their faces, right? We also had the interracial kiss between Kirk and Lieutenant Uhura. And back in the 60s, obviously Gene Roddenberry pushed for that to happen, but a lot of the studios were going to force them to cut that particular scene, especially in the South, because obviously there was still segregation kind of going on back during the 60s in America, and they refused to cut the scene out. And obviously now it's acceptable. Now, obviously, and then we've got obviously like the next generation, obviously where you've got people like Data, who's an android, and in the first pilot of the original series of Star Trek, I remember that there was a number one who was female, and that was Gene Roddenberry's wife. I think it was Majel Barrett. And when they did the second pilot, obviously she wasn't in there, but obviously Strange New Worlds, you have number one in there now, obviously being female, which you couldn't do because, again, the people, didn't like it. And that's what with the Next Generation. And I remember there was a Next Generation episode, and I don't remember the name of it, but I do remember the episode of it because I'm bad with remembering titles, where Riker fell in love with this female alien, and being this particular species of women, basically they were like genderless. So at a certain age, they basically did this operation, so they were neither female or male. And then obviously when the race of the people found out about Riker and that woman, they basically found that disgraceful that she was exploring her sexuality. And then in the end, they imposed the operation of her, so she was neither male or female. And obviously that kind of ended. So we've seen stuff today, and there's probably many more episodes, during where it's tackled certain issues like that. Then we've had, obviously, in Deep Space Nine, where the character of Jadzia Dax, obviously she's a symbiote, and obviously she's female, and she's carrying the symbiote in her tummy. Prior to that, she was Curzon Dax, who was male. And obviously, when the host dies, they move it on to another Trill body. And I remember this episode of when obviously Curzon Dax was actually married, obviously to a woman. And then obviously now with Curzon dead and Dax being inside of Jadzia now, obviously she has all the memories of the previous host. And then she was trying, and then she saw her, which would be her ex wife, and obviously with her Jadzia being a woman and her former partner being a woman. And then obviously you had obviously that gender, obviously the same gender relationship that they wanted to sit there and carry on. And then obviously she was, a previous partner was married, and this forbidden love. And obviously, so I don't, so again, I don't understand when they turn and say, "Oh, it's woke," where they doing stuff to do with having a black captain or having a black character or same-sex relationships, like especially in Discovery, obviously, where you've got the engineer and the doctor who are both male, and they're a married couple. And obviously, if you look at the visions of what Star Trek is about, where everybody's treated equally, that shouldn't be a problem, because obviously it's the future. We've gone past all those things, but yet some of these right-wing YouTubers have take issue with these things and say, "Oh, it's woke because it's doing that and it's doing all these things and it's diversity." When you look at Star Trek, it's always been diverse. Obviously, you've had Uhura as a communication officer. You had the I think her name is Madge Sinclair, and I think it may be in Star Trek 4 where she was the first black Starfleet captain. We've had Captain Terrell, who was in played by Paul Whitfield, who was in Star Trek to the Wrath of Khan. Obviously, they put that thing in his ear, and he ended up being controlled by Khan. And he was a black captain. And obviously, all the issues of how being a black captain or a female captain in Starfleet now isn't an issue, because gender and race and sexual preferences isn't a problem. So, by definition, Star Trek has been woke from day one, if you really want to look at it. Of course, with the original series, certain taboo subjects they couldn't do, because back in the time with the 60s, there were certain rules and things like segregation, and certain things were illegal, so they couldn't do some of the stuff that you could do. That wouldn't be an issue now with a more enlightened society. But the whole vision of of what Star Trek has always been about, or Gene Roddenberry's vision of what Star Trek was supposed to be, by definition, by their definition, has always been woke, if you want to use the terminology. So using that problem, so trying to use that excuse and say, oh, for example, Star Trek Section 1, its biggest problem, for example, is that it's woke, and that's why it's bad, for me, is simply wrong. Star Trek Section 31 isn't bad because it's woke, it's just terrible. And part of the reason why I think it's terrible, again, is to do with when we first see the appearance of Section 31 in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, where an agent known as Luther Sloan, they tried to do, but I want to try to spoil it, but they basically get them to do something, and basically Dr. Bashir is kind of in on it, because Sloan has taken an interest in Dr. Bashir. And then Dr. Bashir finds out that one of the admirals was kind of in it, was pretending he was sick, and basically was in it, and all of a sudden now was totally fine and was in it. And then there's a clip of it where you find out that Section 31 had been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. Obviously, Starfleet and the Federation have basically got certain rules. Obviously, you've heard of stuff like the Prime Directive, where they can't get involved with civilizations who don't have technology. So there's certain rules and guidelines that the Federation have. But with Section 31, basically, they don't adhere to anybody. They basically they basically aren't afraid to get their hands dirty to get certain things done. And they can't be held accountable to anybody, because they're so secret and they're so shady and so inconspicuous, they basically can't be held accountable to anybody. And when we learn of this from Sloan, as he's talking to Dr. Bashir, and he's taken an interest in Dr. Bashir, because obviously we find out that Dr. Bashir is genetically engineered, and he basically wanted to recruit Dr. Bashir to become a Section 31 operative. So we learn all that, and which was absolutely great. We then see Sloan return again, because we find out that all those people, and Odo himself, obviously because with the Founders and the Dominion War and the Federation obviously are losing the war against the Dominion, and obviously the Founders are because the Founders hate solids. So the Section 31 basically end up creating a virus, which they know that they can pass on to Odo, because of all Odo, obviously is siding with Starfleet. They know that that he'll go back to the Great Link and poison his own people. So they basically poison him, so he gets poisoned, and hopefully he'll pass it on to his own people to kill them. And obviously that's Section 31's master plan to, get their hands dirty by any means necessary to stop the Dominion Founders War, and obviously using a dirty bomb in a sense of poisoning the Founders to stop the war. And obviously, Chief O'Brien and Dr. Bashir have to trick and get Section 31 out, so that they can find a cure to cure Odo, and maybe use that to try and convince the Founders that to stop this needless war. And I won't spoil the story of that, but the whole stuff to do with Section 31 was absolutely fantastic. And I've always wanted to see more stuff to do with Section 31, because it was just so interesting and so mysterious, and the fact that they don't have to abide by any Starfleet rules and getting their hands dirty, it just made it really kind of interesting in terms of having to, in doing that. We then would see Section 30, the beginnings of Section 31 in Star Trek Enterprise, which is weird because obviously we first see it in Deep Space Nine. But we then would see Section 31 in Star Trek Enterprise, where Lieutenant Reed, I think, was working for Section 31, and there's certain shady things going on with them wanting to do certain things, and then obviously trying to use Lieutenant Reed's loyalty with Section 31, but then he's torn between his loyalty with Captain Archer and the crew of the Enterprise, but obviously with Section 31. So all that was interesting. It was nice to see the beginnings of it, because obviously Star Trek Enterprise was set a few decades before Captain Kirk. So although we didn't see Section 31 obviously in the original series, because obviously it wasn't, the whole concept of it wasn't done. And then even in the Kelvin timeline, obviously with that splintering off its own timeline, we then would see Section 31 again in the second movie of the Kelvin version of Star Trek, in Star Trek Into Darkness, where we saw Admiral Marcus, played by Peter Weller. You end up finding that he's Section 31 in that ship, and then they were using the character Harrison, who I won't spoiling, and although it's been long enough since that movie's come out, to gain technology and all these uses, and then obviously they wanted to get rid of him so that so that nobody would know that Section 31 used him to get technology and certain advancements and trying to help the Federation. But obviously they were dirty and dodgy. So seeing all that was kind of great. So I had high expectations of seeing Section 31, and then obviously with Michelle Yeoh's character leaving Discovery, because there's all this stuff to do with her not being from a parallel universe. And then the initial idea with Section 31 was for it to have its own mini-series, which I thought probably would have been better, but then they decided to go for a movie. Then the pandemic happened, and then they condensed all the storylines of the miniseries all into one. And yeah, I was excited by it. And also seeing Michelle characters, Emperor Joe, whatever her name is. But anyway, right, that's the whole confused I am with that whole thing now. So I thought it would be seeing her. Obviously she had to leave Michael Burnham, sorry. And then because she couldn't stay there, I thought, it'd be great to see more adventures of her, because Michelle Yeoh is obviously now she's an Oscar award-winning actress now. So I thought, yeah, this is going to be great. I'm looking forward to this, her having her own series, obviously then movie. And when I first saw the couple of trailers, I thought, oh my God, it didn't resemble Star Trek. It just felt like it was trying to be too hip. Again, not woke for me, just hip. And then when they released the last trailer, I think it was over a month ago, I just wasn't very impressed by it. And obviously it appeared on Paramount Plus on the 24th. And luckily I got Paramount Plus for free via Sky Cinema. And to be honest, I wasn't kind of looking forward to it, and I watched it, and I was just completely, just utterly bored of it. Visually, the movie does look great. I'm not going to lie. Visually, special effects, it does look great. But the characters in it were just uninteresting. Some of the characters, they just got rid of them. There's one particular character who was just really bloody annoying. And even to a point where they're doing this at a particular Irish accent, almost to a point where it was borderline offensive. And if I was Irish, I'd be offended by it, because the person just don't take this kind of the wrong way, because I'm not trying to be offensive, but the person just came across just being a hyperactive leprechaun. You know, leprechauns don't exist, but that's how the person came across, and it just gave, for me, anybody of Irish extraction a bad name. And I'm not blaming the actor, it's just it was just poorly written. And we've had Irish actors before in Star Trek. Obviously, we've got Colin Meaney, who played Chief O'Brien in The Next Generation, and then obviously would move to a more prominent role in Deep Space Nine. And he was meant to be Irish, and he was very proud of his, obviously, because the actor being Irish and then his character being Irish, very proud of his Irish roots. And that was dealt beautifully in the way that they encapsulated him being a proud Irishman as in the character and even in real life, and it was done right. And there was an episode where, I think in Deep Space Nine, where these fairy tale characters came to life, and one of the fairy tale characters that comes to life with Chief O'Brien was Rumpelstiltskin. And I ended up finding, and then I found it many years ago, that the original idea was that it was meant to be a leprechaun, and then Colin Meaney, being Irish, found that so offensive that he went to the writers and said, no, that's, you know, like being very offensive to me, for him being Irish. So then they changed the character from being a leprechaun, who was small anyway, to Rumpelstiltskin. So yeah, his character of Chief O'Brien was beautifully told and beautifully done, and one of my favorite characters, even when he was in The Next Generation and even in Deep Space Nine. But this character that they did, and there's kind of a twist with the character, it was absolutely annoying. The only good thing about they did with Emperor Georgiou is the fact that you got her backstory of why she was the way she is, and I thought that's the only part of it that was really kind of great, and that was set on the Mirror Universe, that part of it, and that was really kind of great. So that part of it was actually good. It did a lot to explain why she's the way she is and how her character's come a long way. But the whole plot, in terms of what the whole plot, the MacGuffin of the entire movie was just absolutely just stupid, and it was just silly. You had the character of Garrett, who she is a Starfleet officer. Now that name may seem familiar because the older version of herself, of that character, appeared in an episode of The Next Generation called Yesterday's Enterprise, where something happens where the Enterprise C accidentally comes into the Next Generation timeline, and then it changes. It does severe damages to the timeline because of the ship appearing, and instead of the Enterprise, which is a Galaxy, the Enterprise D is in a Galaxy class starship, it's not a warship. Tasha Yar, who died in season 1 of The Next Generation, is now alive, and the only person who's aware that the timeline is wrong is Guinan, because she's got this she's Elorian, so they can sense certain things. And then obviously we meet Captain Garrett, the older version of her. So when I found out, oh, they're gonna be bringing that character back, but a younger version of her, I thought that's gonna be great. Seeing the younger version of that character. Obviously it's not gonna be the same actress, because it would be impossible, because obviously she would have aged. And bear in mind that the Star Trek Section 1 movie is meant to be set between Star Trek 6 Undiscovered Country, and it's meant to be set between Star Trek 6 Undiscovered Country and Star Trek The Next Generation season 1, roughly episode 1 of Encounter at Farpoint. So it's meant to be somewhere in the middle. although it looks more advanced than what it should be. So that's it. When I heard about that character Garrett being, I thought a character that a younger version, I thought that's going to be interesting. And again, Section 31 and then Emperor George Rose, I thought, it's going to be it's going to have some ingredients of being kind of good. But then again, as soon as I sat down and watched it, I know some people, my brother, for example, when I kind of told about it, he's seen the reviews of it, he refused to watch it. And he's a huge Star Trek fan, exactly like me. But he refuses to watch it because it's that bad. But the problem with Star Trek Section 31 is it doesn't feel like Star Trek. It could have just been a generic sci-fi movie. There's no essence of Star Trek in it, aside from the fact that that Lieutenant Garrett is a Starfleet officer. Aside from the title of it, which is Star Trek 631, and you see the title of it, of the italics and the Starfleet badge, you wouldn't even know it's even Star Trek. Even right down to the fact that normally all the different Star Trek shows, whether it's the movies, the older Star Trek series, the newer Star Trek series, even the animated shows, still have this Star Trek sci-fi theme to them. So they kind of sound very Star Trek-y, if there was such a word. But this doesn't even have that. And it's just, the characters are just bland, boring. When some of them get killed off, you just don't feel anything because you don't really kind of know them. It's just boring, the pacing of it. And again, as what I said earlier on, it's nothing to do with the fact that these people want to say, some of these right-wing YouTubers want to use it as excuse to peddle that it's woke, because some of them are just doing it because some of them just want to sit there and be negative about something because they just want to get the clicks and the views. For me, when I review movies and TV shows and video games or whatever, or products, I always give you, again, it's my opinion, but I want to sit there and give you my opinion. And at the end of the day, it's only my opinion. And even when I hear about, that movie is not very good, sometimes, or TV show's not really good at video game, I still want to sit there and give it a chance, because sometimes people are not always right, or people not always wrong about a TV show, or movie, or a video game. So sometimes it's, you have to formulate your own opinion. So for example, I thought the Penguin series was absolutely brilliant. I absolutely loved the movie. Sorry, the series of all. Apparently might be working on a season 2, and that will happen after the Batman 2, which obviously has been delayed. But I thought that obviously Colin Farrell as Oswald, was really great in it. The actress that plays Farrah Khan, his daughter in it, she was absolutely fantastic. Because she's actress, got really big eyes. She got these really crazy eyes, and it's a shame that she didn't win like an award as well. Not Colin Farrell did, but she was absolutely fantastic in it. She was absolutely brilliant, and the show was just brilliant. And if you haven't watched The Penguin, I would highly recommend watching it. And you kind of feel sorry for the character of the Penguin, but then it's almost tragic at the same time. But you don't feel sorry for him, because his greatest superpower is he's got the gift of the gab. Always able to talk. So he walks with a limp, and and then some of the stuff he's passed, we learn what he did with his siblings, and it's and the twist with his mother. Again, I don't want to spoil it, but the show is just that good. IGN, IGN gives it a 5 out of 10. So you can't always trust what a reviewer says. Some people say, so you have to find out things for yourself. So for me, I love always to give something a fair crack of the whip. So a lot of these, again, YouTubers that were doing that, for me, they were just slating that Star Trek Section 31, not because it genuinely was bad as what I'm describing, but it's because, they're going to sit there and say, it's this left woke agenda, and that's the problem with it, and blah, 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 blah. And they always, and then I guess I explained that Star Trek, by their definition, has always been woke. As I've already explained, I'm not going to go into it. So they're going into it for the wrong reasons. And as I said before, my reasoning for Section 31, the movie, for not being very good, is nothing to do with it being well. It's just badly written. And there's no essence of Star Trek in it. It doesn't even, there's no trace of Star Trek in it. And the storyline of it is just bad. The villain, there's a little bit of a twist with the villain, a little bit. The villain's not compelling. Say, for example, with Star Trek First Contact, you've got the Borg, who are compelling villains in the Best of Both Worlds parts 1 and 2, and they appear in Descent 1 and 2, and they've even been in Voyager as well. Really menacing villain. Then obviously you got Deep Space Nine, where the Federation at one point, I think during the season 4 and 5, were at war with the Klingons, so there was with Gowron and all that stuff. Then you had the Dominion War and the Founders and all that stuff. So they were a menacing villain. Voyager didn't really, and then obviously even with the Kardashians, why you find out why the Bajorans hated the Kardashians, because obviously there's a lot of relations with the Kardashians being the Germans, for example, and obviously with World War II, with the Kardashians being the Germans and the Bajorans being the Jews, and how they were put in camps, and things happen to obviously to the women, which I don't want to get in trouble for saying the actual word, and people being murdered and tortured. And so there's a lot of similarities between the Kardashians and the Germans and the Bajorans and the Jews. So those sets of races of people made it very fascinating as to, the villains of the actual piece. And then later on in Deep Space Nine, you had you had the prophets, who were the good people inside the wormhole, and the Bajorans perceived them as being gods, and you had the Wraiths, who were totally evil, and that was all very compelling. And Voyager had its different sets of villains in the early in the early seasons, and the Borg towards the latter part, and the Hirogen in the Latin from season 4 onwards in Voyager, and then the Borg. So they were very compelling villains, and obviously we've got Khan in Star Trek 2. The Klingons again in Star Trek Undiscovered Country. So there's so many, there's compelling villains of the piece. But in this, it's meant to be a movie. Nothing compelling about it. And often people would say, the Star Trek odd-numbered movies were the worst ones. So people would say that Star Trek 3, even though I kind of enjoyed it. I've always didn't like what they did to Kirk's son, but I understand why they did it. Obviously, Star Trek 5, The Final Frontier. You had, say, Star Trek Insurrection, obviously come off the back of Star Trek First Contact, where they tried to make it a little bit more fun, and obviously Star Trek Nemesis, which which people hated, and then that's what truly killed the franchise for a while. So people consider those movies the worstest ones. But after seeing this now, all those films now are totally redeemed, and this is by section Star Trek 31. By definition, is the worstest Star Trek movie so far. And I even heard that Alex Kurtzman said he wanted to do more Star Trek movies in the future, which I do want to see more Star Trek movies, especially with the Chris Pine characters and the Zach Quinto actors, that they get a fourth movie. And obviously we had Star Trek Picard, which was a slow burner with the first 2 seasons, and with the third season when we finally see the reuniting of the Next Generation crew. I wouldn't be opposed to haven't seen a movie of the Next Generation crew, or or with now 709 being a captain of the Enterprise G, I think it's called now. So because obviously with it being rechristened, with it being renamed, because the ship was originally known as the Titan, but now it's the Enterprise G. So I would even love to see and then obviously with Picard's son, I would even love to see because obviously there were talks of people wanting to see a Star Trek Legacy series, right? And then we get Star Trek Section 31, which was put into the works way before Star Trek Picard season 3, in terms of what they could have done with that. I would love to see a Star Trek. So I think people would have loved to have seen a Star Trek Legacy with 7 of 9 as captain and Picard's son, or even then make a movie with that crew. And I think if they want to redeem themselves, I think that's what they need to do. And I don't know why because everybody wants the Star Trek Legacy series, and I know it's a lot of it to do with budgetary reasons, or even a movie. And I think that's what they need to do. Obviously, we got Star Trek Starfleet Academy coming up in the next couple of years, and obviously a couple more seasons of Star Trek Strange New Worlds to come up. But again, them using somebody's right wing YouTubers using the excuse of It's bad because it's pandered towards the woke mentality that's left. It's simply not the case with Section 4. It's just bad because this is what happens when you don't have a very good script. You don't have it's a poor script, not a compelling script, poor villains, poor characters that have no characterization, no depth in them. Not a good villain. The story MacGuffin of it is really stupid. And the worstest crime of all, that is no influence of Star Trek in threat. Because again, as I said, if it wasn't for the fact that it said Starfleet is Star Trek Section 31, and then the badge in it, with the title of it, you wouldn't even know that it was Star Trek. And the thing is, right, you can do this because, for example, you look at the older Star Trek series, where it's the original series, that had its own starship. And then obviously in the movies as well, Next Generation had its own starship, Enterprise D, and in the movies, Enterprise E. Deep Space Nine will kind of go past it. I'll come back to that, and I'll explain why. Voyager had its own starship, which was the USS Voyager, but obviously was lost in the Delta Quadrant, and obviously was trying to get back to Earth. Then we had Enterprise, obviously, which was set before Kirk's time, but again had a prototype Starfleet ship, which was not very well because it was the first proper deep space warp ship. Not obviously prior to the first warp ship was the Phoenix, which Zefram Cochrane made, and also we saw that in Star Trek First Contact. So they were the starship, so they could travel around and explore different galaxies and meet new people, and especially with Enterprise, obviously with the Earth, with the people from Earth finally being given, being allowed to explore the galaxy, and the Vulcans were opposed to it. That made it kind of new and fresh, seeing the creation of Starfleet and the Federation, the slow build up. So that was kind of great, and having the starship to be able to go to and fro. And then obviously Discovery, again, that was set round about Kirk's time. Again, it still has a starship. Strange New Worlds, obviously that's the Enterprise, but obviously that's when Captain Pike, again, exploring the 5-year mission to explore, and obviously and then after that, 5 years after that, it would be Captain Kirk who then takes command of all. If you want to judge by the Star Trek animated, it was Captain April. But anyway, and then going back to Deep Space Nine, the Deep Space Nine at the time was the black sheep of the Star Trek family, because obviously it didn't have a starship. Yes, it had runabouts to go through the wormhole and go to the Gamma Quadrant, but for the most part, whether it's Federation ships or alien ships, had to come to Deep Space Nine. So everything was coming to them. Obviously, they later would get their own starship, which was the Defiant, which was a warship which was originally built to fight against the Borg, but was deemed it was too powerful, so it literally ripped itself apart. And because of the war with the Dominion and obviously with the Klingons, Cisco helped design it. That he managed to get the Defiant as part of Deep Space Nine. So now Deep Space Nine had although the Defiant was a much smaller ship, it could go to wherever it wanted. It was basically a mini starship. But Deep Space Nine was very different because, again, everything had to come to them. They weren't exploring different planets and different aliens. Everything was coming to them. But so it was a very, very different Star Trek show, and again known as the black sheep of Star Trek, if you pardon the pun, because obviously Cisco was black. So but even though Star Trek was a very different, Deep Space Nine was a very, very different show compared to the other shows that came before and even after it. It still was Star Trek. The basic building blocks of what makes something Star Trek, whether it's the shows or the movies, it was still ingrained in Deep Space Nine, even though it was so far different from the other shows that came before and after it. Section 31, this movie, has no trace of Star Trek DNA in it whatsoever. And again, as I said before, you could easily, there's no musical themes that would associate it with being Star Trek. None of that is absolutely in it. There's no, obviously it's just a threat. There's no build up to it, no nothing. It's just bland, boring. And then it was over an hour and a half. It felt like it was 3 hours. It just wasn't, and it was just, oh, that fell down. It was just very, very corny, poorly written, no character development. Again, as I said about that particular Irish character, just came across as being annoying, and that's why, for me, Star Trek Section 31, which had, again, a lot of premise and promise and potential, when you've seen Section 31 in different Star Trek franchises, where it had so much potential in terms of what they could have done with Section 31, and they could have properly explored it. Maybe it would have worked better as a series rather than like as a movie, because it could have been great if they had these operatives that were going in to do the work that obviously the Federation can't do because of breaking rules, and maybe every episode they would have to sit and get their hands dirty, and it could have been still Star Trek, but a little bit more gritty. So it would allow it to break outside of the typical Star Trek theme and Gene Roddenberry's vision, so to speak. But it did none of that, and that's why it's bad. Because, as I said, for me, it's nothing to do with the left or political agenda. It's just poor. It's just poor characters, poorly written, just boring, plodding. Not exposition with the characters, poor vision. It's just, and most of all, no Star Trek in it. And it simply just was not Star Trek. And I think that's its, of all, you had to have good characters and characterizations and development, which you obviously would need. But its biggest problem is that it's just not Star Trek whatsoever. And I know a lot of these right-wingers will say, YouTubers will say the same thing about new Star Trek now with Discovery and with obviously with Strange New Worlds, but at least it is Star Trek. They've got the Prime Directive. They're exploring planets, different new species, familiar species, following certain rules, character developments, seeing the Federation slowly evolving. Although, you have to remember that certain shows and movies were made for their time. So lots of the original Star Trek shows obviously were made in the 60s. So they had a 60s feel to it, with a lot of the other sci-fi shows in the 60s that are around, like Land of the Giants, things like Lost in Space. They all had that similar feel because they were a product of their time. And obviously early Next Generation was very trying to capitalize on the original Star Trek, and then so it had this really 80s feel to it. And as Next Generation started to go further and further on in the seasons, it started to find its own feet and find its own identity, but then still kept this essence of Star Trek and exploration. Same thing with Deep Space Nine, where Deep Space Nine was very different, where it dealt with, as I said before, the stuff between the Cardassians and the Bajorans. And obviously later on the war with the Founders and the Dominion, and he dealt with a lot of stuff with the Marquis, who were staff with people who fell out with the Federation because of stuff that happened with the Cardassians. Religion was also a lot of stuff that was involved in it, especially with the Bajorans, and they saw Sisko, or Commander Sisko, and later Captain Sisko, as their emissary. So they saw him as a religious figure, and initially he didn't like the idea of it. He just saw himself as a Starfleet officer, but then obviously later on that would change, and there was kind of a twist with that towards the ending of Deep Space Nine. But all of these things had this thing, and that's why I loved Star Trek, because of the characters. There's certain characters that I love more than others, like people like Picard, Riker. They all had their own personality traits. Worf had his wicked sense of humor. Data, Geordi, Counselor Troy, Beverly Crusher. You had like Sisko, Bashir, Chief O'Brien, Jadzia Dax, eventually Ezra Dax. I'm trying to think of so many other characters. But there's so many characters in each, and in Enterprise: Archer, Reed, Malcolm Reed, Tucker, Mayweather, T'Pol, Voyager, Janeway, the Doctor, Seven of Nine, Kess, Tom Paris, Tuvok again, who had a wicked sense of humor. All these characters that were just beloved. And in the original series, where you got Kirk, Spock, Bones, Uhura, Chekhov, Scotty, all the other, and all these other, all the characters. And I know I'm missing out a lot of characters because there's so many, and even some of the characters that were reoccurring, like you had, you had these person like Oldo, and the relationship between Oldo and Quark, and Garak, and Gul Dukat, and Damar, and Weyoun, who's these characters they were just individually just. Well, there's a lot of them that, and Major Kira, obviously, who could forget Major Kira in Deep Space Nine? But there was just so much. There's a vast B'Elanna Torres in Deep Space Nine, and sorry, in Voyager, sorry. But there's so many characters, and they're so vast. And then obviously you got, and in the versions of the characters in the Kelvin timeline Star Trek. And even though you got the new actors playing Kirk and Spock in the Kelvin timeline, and Uhura and Scotty and Pablo Chekhov and the rest of them, they all, you could tell that they were the characters from the original, but still made it their own, even though it's a modern reboot stroke different timeline. But they could tell that that Chris Pine was Captain Kirk. His version of how William Shatner's portraying it, but still at the same time added his own flavour in it, so it wasn't a complete copy of how William Shatner did it. And obviously, we've got Kirk, we've seen in Strange New Worlds, and Spock in Strange New Worlds, and that taking it. It's been absolutely brilliant. And this is what I mean. And then, so you compare and there's been lots of reoccurring characters and vast amount of characters from all of the Star Trek movies, and even in lower decks where you got like Mariner and all these characters that we've across the animated movie shows, where it's been Lower Decks or Prodigy. All these characters have got something to offer, and they're all very well written characters. And then we've seen how you look at how Worf was in season 1, and obviously he became chief security officer when Tasha Yar died and was killed off. And then you see how and then he was only like a bit part character, and then eventually he was brought into the fold and his character grew, and then we saw him in Deep Space Nine, and you see the development of his character, or Data, his quest to be human, and then eventually getting the emotion chip. And then we see him in Star Trek Picard in season 3, which I won't kind of spoil how he comes back. But it was just great, and we see how these characters have all developed, and especially in Picard season 3, where you see the older version of the characters 30 years on, and how they've started families and whatnot. And it's about character development, so we care and love these characters. These characters that in Star Trek 31, for me, they're an utter waste and an utter space, and I feel sorry for the actors. You know, I can't blame them, the actors and actresses in it, who I feel sorry for, because nobody intends to put out a bad performance or a bad portrayal of a character. I blame it on the script. And so, in trying to wrap things up now, because it's gone on for quite a long while, for me, the problem is with Star Trek Section 1 is not because of some of the right-wing people, YouTubers going on about it's woke and all this complete crap. It's to do with, as I said before, poor character development, poor characters you don't care about, poor story MacGuffin, poor story development, and basically the entire Star Trek DNA is not even in Star Trek Section 31 movie. So yeah, as somebody that didn't want to come into it like some of these right-wing YouTubers want to go into it, because they're going into it hating it from the beginning, I wanted to go into it as a Trekkie and a huge Star Trek fan, and I wanted it to succeed and to do well, because it's, again, a huge Star Trek fan, as I've already said, and obviously loved Section 31 and wanted to see more of it. And unfortunately, they've just completely and utterly flushed it down the toilet. Hopefully, the powers that be take on board what they've done wrong and give us what we really want. And I think they owe it to us fans to make Star Trek Legacy, with Captain 7 of 9 and her crew, whether it's a series or it's they make a series of her, or if they do give her a movie, don't screw it up like what they did with Star Trek Section 31. To me, utterly poor, terrible, and hugely disappointing.